The gunshot echoed across the dusty main street of Florence, Arizona Territory, 1887, as Beau Michaels ducked behind a water trough, his heart pounding against his ribs. He hadn't meant to start trouble, hadn't even drawn his own weapon, but trouble had found him all the same. The hot desert sun beat down relentlessly as he peered cautiously over his makeshift shelter, catching sight of Sheriff Frank O'Malley striding purposefully toward him, the tin star on his chest glinting in the harsh sunlight. "Come on out, Michaels." The sheriff bellowed, his weathered face set in grim determination. "You've caused enough commotion for one day," Beau cursed under his breath, pushing back his sweat-dampened dark hair. He'd only been in Florence for 3 days, and somehow he'd already managed to get on the wrong side of both the law and the most dangerous man in the county. His thoughts flashed to the confrontation at the Golden Nugget Saloon, to Harlan Weber's ugly sneer as he'd accused Beau of cheating at cards, to the bottle that had shattered against the wall inches from Beau's head. "I said come out, son." Sheriff O'Malley's voice was closer now. "Don't make this worse than it already is." With a resigned sigh, Beau stood slowly, raising his hands above his head. "I didn't draw first, Sheriff," he called out. "Weber was the one who—" "Save it," the sheriff cut him off, approaching with his revolver trained on Beau's chest. "Half the saloon says you were cheating. The other half says Weber threatened to gut you like a fish before you even touched those cards. Either way, you've torn up the best saloon in town, broken more bottles than I can count, and poor Florence O'Brien's dress shop window is shattered to kingdom come." Beau winced at the mention of the dress shop. In the chaos of the saloon brawl that had spilled into the street, someone he wasn't entirely sure who had sent a chair flying through the pristine glass window of O'Brien's fine apparel. "I can explain about Miss O'Brien's shop." "Oh, I'm sure she'll be mighty interested in your explanation," Sheriff O'Malley said dryly, gesturing with his gun for Beau to start walking toward the jailhouse. "Miss O'Brien has been saving for that window glass for months. Ordered it special from back east." Guilt twisted in Beau's stomach as he walked ahead of the sheriff, acutely aware of the curious stares of the townsfolk who had emerged to witness his humiliation. He'd never intended to cause any trouble in Florence. He'd just been passing through on his way to California, looking to make a fresh start after 3 years of drifting from ranch to ranch across Texas and New Mexico. The jailhouse was a sturdy stone building with iron bars on the windows. Inside, it was cooler than the sweltering street, but not by much. Sheriff O'Malley directed Beau to a wooden chair beside his desk and took his gun belt before settling into his own seat with a weary sigh. "You've put me in a difficult position, Mr. Michaels," the sheriff said, removing his hat and running a hand through his graying hair. "Weber's mad as a hornet, threatening to press charges for cheating, assault, and whatever else he can think of. And Miss O'Brien—" The door to the jailhouse swung open at that moment, cutting off whatever the sheriff had been about to say. Beau turned to see a woman storming in, her dark blonde hair escaping from what had once been a neat chignon, her blue eyes blazing with fury. She was dressed in a simple but elegant blue dress, now dusted with glass fragments and what looked like splinters of wood. "Sheriff O'Malley," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "I want to press charges." Beau felt his heart sink as he realized this must be Florence O'Brien herself. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps 25 or 26, and despite the fury etched across her features, she was undeniably beautiful. "Miss O'Brien," the sheriff acknowledged, standing respectfully. "I was just discussing the incident with Mr. Michaels here." Florence O'Brien's gaze shifted to Beau, taking in his tall frame, his dust-covered clothes, and the bruise forming on his jaw where Weber had landed a solid punch. Her expression didn't soften. "So you're the man who destroyed my shop window," she said coldly. "Do you have any idea how long I saved for that glass? How many dresses I had to sew to afford it?" Beau stood, removing his hat. "Madam, I apologize sincerely for the damage to your property. I assure you I had no intention." "Your intentions are irrelevant, Mr. Michaels," she interrupted. "The fact remains that my shop window is in pieces, my merchandise is covered in glass and dust, and I've lost an entire day of business." She turned back to the sheriff. "I want him held accountable." Sheriff O'Malley nodded thoughtfully. "Well, Miss O'Brien, the way I see it, Mr. Michaels here has a few options. He can spend some time in my jail while we sort out the various charges against him, and Weber's got friends on the town council who'll make sure those charges stick." He gave Beau a significant look. "Or he can make restitution to those he's wronged." "I'll pay for the window," Beau said quickly, reaching for the money pouch on his belt, only to find it missing. His stomach sank as he remembered losing it somewhere in the saloon brawl. "That is, I will once I recover my funds." They seemed to have gone missing in the commotion. Florence O'Brien let out a sound of disgust. "Convenient." The sheriff drummed his fingers on the desk, studying Beau thoughtfully. "Miss O'Brien, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you mention just last Sunday that you were in need of help around your place? With your father being laid up with his back and all?" Beau watched in confusion as Florence's cheeks colored slightly. "I don't see what that has to do with," she began. "Way I see it," Sheriff O'Malley continued, a twinkle appearing in his eye, "Mr. Michaels here owes you for damages. But he's also a strong, capable young man who might be of service to you and your father while your pa recovers. And it would keep him out of my jail, which is getting mighty crowded these days." Florence's eyes widened. "You cannot be suggesting—" "I'm suggesting Mr. Michaels work off his debt to you," the sheriff clarified, though the amused gleam in his eye suggested something else entirely. "Unless, of course, you'd prefer a more permanent arrangement." "A more permanent, Sheriff O'Malley," Florence spluttered, her cheeks now flaming red. "You cannot possibly be suggesting marriage as a solution to a broken window." Beau felt his own face grow warm as he realized the sheriff's implication. "Sir, I hardly think—" "Now, hear me out." Sheriff O'Malley held up his hands. "Miss O'Brien, you need help at your place and with your shop. You've said yourself that business is suffering without your father's support. And you, Michaels," he turned to Beau, "you're facing jail time for the ruckus at the saloon, destruction of property, and Weber is determined to see you punished for what he claims was cheating." The sheriff leaned back in his chair, his expression turning serious. "Weber has friends in high places, son. He's got the judge's ear. You could be looking at a year in territorial prison, not just my little jail, but if you were a respectable, married man with roots in the community." He let the implication hang in the air. "This is outrageous," Florence protested. "I came here for justice, not to be married off to the first criminal who breaks my property." "Not a criminal yet," the sheriff corrected mildly. "And from what my deputy witnessed, Weber was as much to blame for that fight as anyone." He looked at Florence with genuine affection, like a father might regard a stubborn daughter. "Florence, your pa's been worried about you since your mother passed. You working yourself to the bone trying to keep that shop running and taking care of him too. Patrick O'Brien is one of my oldest friends, and he confided in me just last week that his greatest worry is leaving you alone in the world when his time comes." Florence's anger seemed to falter at the mention of her father. "My personal circumstances are not relevant to this. This property dispute." Sheriff O'Malley turned his attention back to Beau. "So what'll it be, son? Jail time while we sort out these charges, or—" He glanced meaningfully at Florence. Beau looked at Florence O'Brien, taking in her flushed face, the stubborn set of her jaw, and the flashing indignation in her blue eyes. He'd never been one to settle down, had always cherished his freedom to roam where the wind took him. The idea of marriage to a complete stranger, no less, was absurd. And yet, as their eyes met across the sheriff's office, something stirred in Beau's chest. There was pride in the way she held herself, courage in the firm line of her mouth. He'd known plenty of women in his 29 years of life, but few who carried themselves with such dignity even when furious. "I'll take your offer, Sheriff," Beau heard himself say, his eyes never leaving Florence's shocked face. "I choose marriage," Florence gasped. "You cannot be serious." Sheriff O'Malley slapped his desk with evident satisfaction. "Well now, that's settled then." "Nothing is settled," Florence protested. "I haven't agreed to this preposterous arrangement." "No, you haven't," Beau agreed, surprising her. He stepped forward, still holding his hat in his hands. "Miss O'Brien, I've done you a wrong and I aim to make it right. If you'll allow me to work for you to help with your shop and your father until I've paid off my debt, I'd be much obliged. As for marriage—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I won't hold you to the sheriff's suggestion. But I will say that if you ever did consider me worthy of your hand, I'd count myself the luckiest man in the Arizona territory." Florence stared at him, clearly caught off guard by his sincerity. For a moment, her composure slipped, revealing uncertainty beneath her anger. Sheriff O'Malley cleared his throat. "How about a compromise? Mr. Michaels works for you for, say, 2 months. Helps around the shop, assists your father, pays for that window with his labor. If by the end of that time you both decide marriage isn't in the cards, then so be it. But if you find yourselves compatible—" He shrugged. Florence hesitated, glancing between the sheriff and Beau. "And the charges against him, held in abeyance, pending his good behavior and fulfillment of his debt to you." After a long moment, Florence nodded stiffly. 2 months. "And he stays in the shed behind the shop, not in our house." "Agreed," Beau said quickly before she could change her mind. Sheriff O'Malley stood, looking pleased with himself. "Excellent. Mr. Michaels, you'll report to Miss O'Brien's shop tomorrow morning at sunrise. Until then, you'll be my guest here at the jailhouse just to make sure you don't change your mind and try to skip town." As the sheriff led him to a cell, Beau found himself wondering what exactly he'd gotten himself into. The idea of being tied down to one place to one woman had never appealed to him before. And yet, something about Florence O'Brien's fierce dignity had stirred something within him. Perhaps, he thought, as the cell door clanged shut, this unexpected detour might lead somewhere worth going after all. Dawn broke over Florence, Arizona territory, with a palette of pinks and golds that painted the desert landscape in soft hues. Beau Michaels, released from his night in the jailhouse with a warning from Sheriff O'Malley to behave himself, made his way down the still quiet Main Street toward O'Brien's fine apparel. The damage from yesterday's chaos was evident. The elegant storefront, painted a tasteful blue with white trim, stood out among the more utilitarian buildings of Florence. Or it would have, if not for the gaping hole where the display window had been. Someone, Florence herself, presumably had nailed boards over the opening, but they did little to restore the shop's former dignity. Beau paused across the street, adjusting the battered leather saddlebag that contained his few possessions. He'd retrieved his horse from the livery stable, along with his money pouch, which had somehow found its way into the possession of the stable boy. The gelding was now comfortably settled in the town's corral, with feed paid for a week, in advance, a small expense that had further depleted Beau's modest savings. Taking a deep breath, he crossed the dusty street and knocked on the shop's door. When there was no immediate answer, he tried the handle and found it locked. He hesitated, uncertain whether to knock again or wait, when a voice called out from the side of the building. "Back here, Mr. Michaels." Following the voice, Beau rounded the corner of the shop to find Florence O'Brien in the small yard behind the building. She wore a simple work dress with an apron, her hair pinned back more practically than it had been yesterday. She was struggling with a large bucket of water, attempting to carry it toward a modest wooden structure that he presumed was the shed she'd mentioned. Without hesitation, Beau hurried forward. "Allow me, Miss O'Brien." She straightened, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead with the back of her wrist. "I've been managing on my own just fine, Mr. Michaels." "I don't doubt it," he replied, carefully taking the bucket from her hands before she could protest further. "But since I'm here to work, I might as well make myself useful." Florence regarded him with suspicion for a moment before giving a curt nod. "The shed needs to be cleaned out. It's been used for storage these past few years, but there's a cot in there somewhere beneath all the crates." "That's where you'll be sleeping." Beau peered through the open door of the shed. It was cramped and cluttered with boxes, bolts of fabric, and what appeared to be broken pieces of furniture. A thin shaft of sunlight cut through the dusty air from a small window set high in the back wall. "I've slept in worse places," he said with a slight smile. "I'll have it sorted out in no time." "See that you do," Florence replied, but some of the ice in her tone had melted. "When you're finished, there's a list of chores on the kitchen table. My father is still asleep, so please try to keep the noise down when you're working near the house." The house in question was a modest but well-maintained structure connected to the back of the shop. It was built of sturdy adobe with a wooden porch that wrapped around one side, offering shade from the brutal Arizona sun. "Yes, madam," Beau agreed. "And the shop window. I'd like to start making arrangements for replacing it as soon as possible." Something that might have been surprise flickered across Florence's face before she composed herself. "The glass will need to be ordered from Tucson. Mr. Henderson at the general store can help with that." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you." With that, she turned and headed back toward the house, leaving Beau to his task. He set to work immediately, carrying boxes and crates out of the shed and organizing them in neat stacks according to what appeared to be their contents. By mid-morning, he had cleared enough space to uncover the promised cot, which was sturdy enough despite its age. As he worked, Beau found himself wondering about Florence O'Brien and her father. What had brought them to Florence, Arizona? How long had they been running the dress shop? And what had happened to leave her father injured and her mother deceased? His curiosity would have to wait for answers. There was work to be done, and Beau was determined to prove himself reliable. By the time the sun reached its zenith, he had completely transformed the shed, sweeping out years of dust, arranging the remaining crates to serve as makeshift furniture, and even replacing a broken hinge on the door. Wiping sweat from his brow, Beau made his way to the house to find the promised list of chores. He knocked softly on the back door, mindful of Florence's warning about her father resting. The door opened to reveal Florence, who looked him up and down with an appraising eye. "You're filthy," she observed. Beau glanced down at his dust-covered clothes and grimaced. "Hazard of the job, I'm afraid. The shed is habitable now, though." "There's a pump in the yard," she said, pointing to a corner near a small vegetable garden. "Clean yourself up before you come inside. I've left some cold chicken and bread on the table for you." Beau's stomach rumbled at the mention of food. "That's mighty generous of you, Miss O'Brien." Something that might have been a smile tugged at her lips before she suppressed it. "It's practical, Mr. Michaels. I need you in working condition if you're going to be of any use to me." After washing the worst of the dust from his face and hands at the pump, Beau entered the O'Brien kitchen. It was a warm, welcoming space, with copper pots hanging from hooks and bunches of dried herbs suspended from the ceiling beams. The promised meal waited on a small wooden table, along with a glass of water and a sheet of paper covered in neat handwriting. As he ate, Beau studied the list. There were the expected tasks: chopping firewood, repairing a leaking roof, building a proper barricade for the broken shop window, but also more specialized requests like reinforce dress forms and construct new display shelves for the shop. He was just finishing his meal when he heard shuffling footsteps approaching. Looking up, he saw an older man with Florence's same blue eyes leaning heavily on a wooden cane. This must be Patrick O'Brien. "So you're the young man who's going to marry my daughter," Patrick said without preamble, his Irish accent still strong despite what must have been years in America. Beau nearly choked on his last bite of bread. "Sir, Pa." Florence appeared behind her father, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "That is not what I told you. Mr. Michaels is working to pay for the damage to the shop window, that's all." Patrick O'Brien's eyes twinkled with mischief. "That's not what Frank O'Malley told me when he stopped by this morning while you were hanging the washing." He made his way to the table and sat down across from Beau with a wince that spoke of considerable pain. "Said this young man chose marriage over jail when given the option." Florence closed her eyes briefly, as if praying for patience. "Sheriff O'Malley has an overactive imagination and far too much time on his hands." "Well, boy," Patrick fixed Beau with a penetrating stare, "did you or did you not tell Frank you'd rather marry my Florence than sit in his jail?" Put on the spot, Beau felt his own face growing warm. "Sir, what I said was," he glanced at Florence, who was looking at him with a mixture of embarrassment and curiosity. "I said that if your daughter ever considered me worthy of her hand, I'd count myself the luckiest man in the Arizona Territory. But I have no intention of holding her to an arrangement she didn't agree to." Patrick studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "A diplomatic answer. But tell me this: why would a man like you, clearly used to roaming free, even consider marriage to a woman you'd only just met?" It was a fair question, and one Beau had been asking himself since the words had left his mouth in the sheriff's office. He could have simply agreed to work off his debt and be done with it. Why had he said what he'd said? "I suppose," he said carefully, "I saw something in your daughter that spoke to me, a strength of character, a dignity. Not many women would have faced down the sheriff and a strange man with such composure after having their livelihood threatened." Florence, still standing in the doorway, shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "And," Beau continued, holding Patrick's eyes, "I've spent the last 3 years drifting from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots. Perhaps part of me recognized that it might be time to stop running." "Running from what?" Patrick asked shrewdly. Beau's expression shuddered slightly. "The war left a lot of men restless, sir." Understanding dawned in Patrick's eyes. "You fought for the Union." "Yes, sir. Though I was hardly more than a boy, lied about my age to enlist in '64. Patrick nodded slowly. "I came to this country in '49 during the famine, know something about leaving the past behind." He pushed himself to his feet with effort. "Florence, stop hovering in the doorway like a ghost and show Mr. Michaels where the tools are kept. That roof won't fix itself." As her father limped out of the kitchen, Florence approached the table, collecting Beau's empty plate. "You didn't have to entertain his matchmaking, Mr. Michaels," she said quietly. "He's been trying to see me settled since my mother died 3 years ago." "I wasn't entertaining anything, Miss O'Brien. I merely spoke the truth." Beau stood, picking up the list of chores. "Now, about these tools." For the rest of the day, Beau threw himself into his work with single-minded focus. He patched the leaking roof, chopped enough firewood to last the household a week, and began constructing a more secure covering for the shop window. All the while, he was aware of Florence moving between the house and the shop, occasionally watching him work with an unreadable expression. As dusk fell, casting long shadows across the yard, Florence approached him with a lantern and another plate of food, this time a hearty stew that steamed in the cooling evening air. "You should eat while it's hot," she said, setting the plate on a stump he'd been using as a workbench. "And then get some rest. The shed is ready for you. I've left some blankets on the cot." Beau straightened, stretching his sore muscles. "Thank you, Miss O'Brien. This is very kind." "It's Florence," she said unexpectedly. "If you're going to be working here for 2 months, Miss O'Brien will become tiresome." Beau smiled, the expression transforming his dust-streaked face. "Florence, then, and I'm Beau." She nodded, her own lips curving slightly in response. "Good night, Beau." As she walked away, the lantern light catching in her hair and turning it to spun gold, Beau felt a strange tightening in his chest. There was something about Florence O'Brien that called to him, something beyond her obvious beauty or the circumstances that had thrown them together. Perhaps, he thought as he ate the delicious stew, these 2 months might prove more life-changing than he had anticipated. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm as natural as breathing. Beau rose with the sun each morning, splashed cold water on his face from the yard pump, and set to work on whatever task was most pressing. Florence opened the shop at 9 o'clock sharp, serving the women of Florence, Arizona, with a professional courtesy that transformed into genuine warmth whenever a customer brought their children along. Beau learned that Florence had a particular soft spot for children. She kept a jar of peppermint sticks behind the counter and always had time to listen to a little girl's opinion on ribbons or a boy's proud description of a new fishing pole. It was a side of her he hadn't expected, this tenderness beneath her businesslike exterior. Patrick O'Brien, for his part, proved to be a repository of knowledge about everything from carpentry to the local politics of the Arizona territory. His back injury, sustained in a fall from a ladder while repairing the shop roof 6 months earlier, had left him unable to perform physical labor, but his mind remained sharp. He took to sitting in a comfortable chair near wherever Beau was working, offering advice and telling stories of Ireland and his early days in America. "She's like her mother, my Florence," Patrick told Beau one morning as they sat in the shade, taking a break from the relentless heat. "Stubborn as a mule, twice as smart as most men, and with a heart bigger than she lets on." Beau nodded, taking a sip from the cup of water Florence had brought out to them before returning to a customer in the shop. "She's a remarkable woman." Patrick eyed him shrewdly. "And are you still thinking you might want to marry her when your 2 months are up?" The direct question caught Beau off guard. I wouldn't presume that she'd have me, sir. That's not what I asked, boy." Beau was saved from answering by the arrival of Sheriff O'Malley, who strolled into the yard with the unhurried gait of a man with time on his hands. "Patrick Michaels," he greeted them, tipping his hat. "Fine day, isn't it?" Patrick snorted. "It's hot enough to fry an egg on a rock, Frank." "What brings you by? Checking up on our arrangement," the sheriff chuckled, accepting a cup of water from Beau with a nod of thanks. "Just making my rounds, though I am pleased to see things working out here." He cast an appraising eye over the improvements Beau had made to the yard and the shed. "Looks like you've been busy, Michaels." "Yes, sir," Beau agreed. "There's plenty to be done. And how's that shop window coming along? I passed by the front earlier and saw you've got a proper barricade up now." "The glass has been ordered from Tucson," Beau explained. "Should be here within the week. In the meantime, I've made the temporary covering more secure and attractive." What he didn't mention was that he'd spent hours designing and building a new wooden framework for the window that would be stronger and more elegant than the original. He'd carved decorative elements into the wood, delicate scrolls and flowers that Florence had admired with genuine surprise when she'd first seen them. "Didn't take you for a craftsman," she'd said, running her fingers over the intricate patterns. "My father was a carpenter before the war," Beau had explained. "Taught me a thing or two before he went off to fight and didn't come back." The memory of that conversation, of the understanding that had passed between them in that moment, lingered in Beau's mind as Sheriff O'Malley chatted with Patrick about town affairs. "And Weber's been asking about you," the sheriff was saying, pulling Beau's attention back to the present. "Weber." Beau tensed at the mention of the man who'd started the saloon brawl. "Seems mighty interested in knowing when you'll be done working here. Made some comments about unfinished business." The sheriff's casual tone didn't match the warning in his eyes. "I told him you'd be occupied for some time yet. Harlan Weber's a mean drunk with too much money and not enough sense," Patrick said dismissively. "Always has been, even back when his father was running the ranch." "Well, he's been drinking less lately, which makes him more dangerous, not less," Sheriff O'Malley replied. "Just keep your wits about you, Michaels. Weber holds a grudge like other men hold gold tightly and forever." After the sheriff departed, Beau found himself distracted by the warning. He'd assumed that his arrangement with the O'Briens had put an end to the trouble with Weber, but apparently the man was still nursing his wounded pride. "Don't fret about Harlan Weber," Patrick advised, reading Beau's expression. "Frank'll keep him in line." Beau nodded, though he wasn't entirely reassured. Men like Weber, with money and influence, often found ways to exact revenge without breaking the law openly. His concerns were temporarily forgotten that evening when Florence announced at dinner that she'd received an invitation to the town's Founders' Day dance, to be held that Saturday night. "Mrs. Henderson specifically mentioned that you both were welcome to attend," she told Beau and her father, passing a basket of fresh bread. "Though I told her you might not be up to it yet, Pa." Patrick waved a dismissive hand. "I'm not dead yet, girl. A little music and company would do me good." He turned to Beau with a mischievous gleam in his eye. "And I'm sure our young friend here wouldn't mind escorting you to the dance. Would you, Beau?" Beau, caught in the middle of taking a drink of water, nearly choked for the second time in Patrick's presence. "I would be honored," he managed once he'd recovered, "if Florence wishes it." Florence's cheeks colored slightly. "It would be appropriate, I suppose, since you're staying here. People might talk otherwise." "Heaven forbid we give the good people of Florence something to talk about," Patrick said dryly. "Besides their own business, I mean." Florence shot her father a look that clearly said behave yourself before turning back to Beau. "Do you dance, Mr. Michaels?" "I've been known to," Beau admitted with a smile, "though I can't claim to be particularly graceful." "Well, we'll see about that on Saturday," Patrick declared, as if the matter were settled. Saturday evening arrived with a burst of excitement that seemed to vibrate through the small town. The Founders' Day dance was one of Florence's biggest annual celebrations, commemorating the establishment of the town in 1866. The entire community turned out for the event, which was held in the large barn belonging to the Henderson family just outside town. Beau waited in the O'Briens' small parlor, feeling uncharacteristically nervous. He'd spent the morning in Tucson, using some of his carefully hoarded money to purchase a new shirt and have his good boots polished. His dark hair was freshly trimmed, courtesy of the town barber, and he'd shaved with extra care. "You look like a man heading to the gallows, not a dance," Patrick observed, limping into the room with his cane. The older man was dressed in his Sunday best, his silver hair neatly combed. Just don't want to embarrass Florence in front of the whole town, Beau admitted. Patrick's expression softened. You're halfway in love with my daughter already, aren't you? Before Beau could formulate a response to this alarmingly accurate observation, the sound of footsteps on the stairs drew their attention. Florence appeared in the doorway, and Beau felt his breath catch in his throat. She wore a dress of deep blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes and complemented the golden hues in her hair, which was arranged in an elegant style he'd never seen before, with soft curls framing her face. A simple silver locket hung at her throat, catching the light when she moved. You look beautiful, Beau said simply, unable to find more eloquent words. Florence's cheeks colored prettily. Thank you. Shall we go? The Hendersons' wagon should be arriving any moment to collect us. The Henderson barn had been transformed for the occasion. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the space cleared for dancing. Hay bales arranged around the perimeter provided seating, and a small group of musicians, 2 fiddlers, a guitarist, and a man with a harmonica were setting up in one corner. A long table laden with food and drink stretched along one wall. As they entered, Beau was acutely aware of the curious glances and whispered conversations their arrival provoked. Clearly, word of his arrangement with the O'Briens had spread throughout Florence, embellished no doubt by Sheriff O'Malley's knowing hints and Patrick's lack of discretion. Miss O'Brien, a plump, cheerful woman in a purple dress, hurried toward them. And Mr. O'Brien, how wonderful that you felt well enough to join us, and this must be Mr. Michaels. She extended a hand to Beau. I'm Harriet Henderson. My husband owns the general store. A pleasure, madam, Beau replied, shaking her hand. Florence has told us how helpful you've been around the shop, Mrs. Henderson continued, with a significant look at Florence that made the younger woman shift uncomfortably. Such a blessing to have a strong young man around the place, isn't it, dear? Before Florence could reply, the music started up a lively reel that immediately drew several couples to the dance floor. Oh, the dancing is beginning, Mrs. Henderson exclaimed. You young people should join in. Patrick, come sit with me and the other old folks. I want to hear all about how your back is mending. As Mrs. Henderson led Patrick away toward a group of older townsfolk, Beau turned to Florence with a questioning look. Would you like to dance? For a moment, she hesitated, and Beau thought she might refuse. Then she nodded, placing her hand in his outstretched one. Yes, I would. The dance was fast-paced and required little conversation, for which Beau was grateful. He concentrated on not stepping on Florence's feet and was pleasantly surprised to discover that they moved well together. Florence was light on her feet and followed his lead easily, her eyes bright with enjoyment despite her initial reluctance. As the evening progressed, they danced several more times, with breaks to eat, drink, and socialize with the townsfolk. Beau found himself genuinely enjoying the company of Florence's neighbors and friends. There was a sense of community here that he hadn't experienced since before the war, a feeling of belonging that both attracted and frightened him. During a slower dance, Florence finally addressed the curious glances that had followed them all evening. Everyone is talking about us, she said quietly, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder as they moved around the floor. Does that bother you? Beau asked, equally softly. It should, she admitted, but oddly it doesn't, not as much as I expected. She met his eyes with a directness that had become characteristic of their interactions. You've surprised me, Beau Michaels. How so? I expected a ruffian, a troublemaker. Instead. She paused, seeming to search for the right words. Instead, I've found a man who carves flowers into wood, who makes my father laugh for the first time in months, who treats my customers with respect whether they're buying an expensive dress or just a spool of thread? Beau felt warmth spreading through his chest at her words. I'm glad I've exceeded your expectations. Don't get too pleased with yourself, she warned, though a smile played at her lips. You still snore loudly enough to wake the dead. I can hear you all the way from the shed on still nights. Beau laughed, the sound drawing more curious glances from nearby dancers. My most sincere apologies, Miss O'Brien. Their moment of connection was interrupted by a commotion at the barn entrance. Beau looked up to see Harlan Weber striding in, flanked by two of his ranch hands. The man was dressed expensively but tastelessly, with too many gold watch chains and an oversized belt buckle that gleamed in the lantern light. Trouble, Beau murmured, instinctively drawing Florence slightly closer. She followed his gaze and stiffened. Harlan Weber. He wasn't invited. Problem? Weber's voice carried across the barn as he confronted Mr. Henderson, who had moved to intercept him. I'm a taxpayer in this county, same as anyone. Got just as much right to enjoy the festivities. Mr. Henderson, a tall, thin man with spectacles, stood his ground. This is a private gathering, Harlan, by invitation only. Is that so? Weber's gaze swept the barn until it landed on Beau and Florence. A slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face. Seems you're letting just about anyone in these days, even cheaters and drifters. The music faltered as the musicians sensed the rising tension. Couples stopped dancing and a hush fell over the barn. I should check on my father, Florence whispered, pulling away from Beau. Stay close, he advised, releasing her but remaining alert as she moved toward where Patrick was sitting with Mrs. Henderson and the other older residents. Weber, seeing Florence leave Beau's side, changed course and began moving toward her instead. Beau immediately followed, reaching Florence just as Weber stepped into her path. Miss O'Brien. Weber greeted her with exaggerated politeness, removing his hat. You're looking particularly lovely this evening. Would you do me the honor of a dance? Florence's expression remained composed, though Beau could see tension in the set of her shoulders. Thank you for the compliment, Mr. Weber, but I was just going to check on my father. Patrick looks fine to me, Weber said, glancing dismissively toward where the older man was watching the confrontation with narrowed eyes. One dance won't hurt. The lady declined, Beau said quietly, stepping up beside Florence. Weber's face darkened. Nobody asked you, Michaels. His breath smelled of whiskey despite the sheriff's claim that he'd been drinking less. This is between me and Miss O'Brien. Florence, Patrick O'Brien called from across the barn, his voice carrying clearly in the tense silence. Is everything all right, darling? Yes, Pa, Florence replied, never taking her eyes off Weber. Mr. Weber was just leaving. Weber's face flushed with anger. I don't take orders from women, especially not ones who consort with cheaters. He reached out as if to grab Florence's arm. Beau moved faster, catching Weber's wrist in a grip that made the other man wince. That's enough, Beau said softly, dangerously. You're drunk, Weber. Go home before you do something you'll regret. For a tense moment, it seemed Weber might escalate the confrontation. Then Sheriff O'Malley's voice cut through the silence. Evening, folks. Harlan, I believe the Hendersons have made it clear this is a private affair. Weber looked from the sheriff to Beau, his expression calculating. Finally, he yanked his arm free from Beau's grip. Fine. Not much of a celebration anyway. He backed away a few steps before pointing at Beau. This isn't over, Michaels, not by a long shot. As Weber and his men departed, the tension in the barn gradually dissipated. The musicians struck up another tune and conversation resumed, though with an undercurrent of excitement at the drama that had unfolded. Are you all right? Beau asked Florence, who had gone pale beneath her composure. She nodded. Yes, Harlan Weber has been. persistent in his attentions for some time now, despite numerous refusals. "Has he threatened you before?" Florence hesitated. "Not explicitly, but he's made it clear he doesn't take rejection well." She glanced toward the barn door where Weber had disappeared. "Thank you for intervening." Before Beau could respond, Patrick joined them, moving as quickly as his injured back would allow. "Florence, Beau, that man is becoming a problem." Sheriff O'Malley approached as well, his expression grim. "I'll have a word with Harlan tomorrow when he's sobered up." "But Patrick's right, he's fixating on both of you now." He looked at Beau. "Especially you, Michaels. You embarrassed him publicly twice now." "It wasn't my intention to make an enemy," Beau said. "Intention rarely matters with men like Weber," the sheriff replied. "Just watch yourselves. And maybe don't walk home alone tonight." Despite the sheriff's warning, the remainder of the evening passed pleasantly. The incident with Weber was gradually overshadowed by the joy of the celebration. And by the time the last dance was called, Florence's color had returned, and she was smiling again. The final dance was a slow waltz, and Beau found himself holding Florence closer than before, her hand warm in his, her body a gentle pressure against his chest when the steps of the dance brought them together. "Thank you," she said softly as they moved around the floor. "For what?" "For making this evening special, despite Weber's interruption." Her eyes met his, open and honest in a way they hadn't been before. "I can't remember the last time I enjoyed myself so much at a dance." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of feelings that had been building over the past 2 weeks. As the music drew to a close, Beau found himself reluctant to release her, to break the connection that seemed to vibrate between them like a plucked string. Later, as they walked home under a canopy of stars, Patrick several paces ahead with Mr. Henderson supporting him on one side, Beau felt Florence's hand slip into his. He squeezed it gently, and she returned the pressure, a silent acknowledgement of something new and fragile growing between them. The weeks that followed the Founders' Day dance saw a transformation in the relationship between Beau and Florence. The carefully maintained formality that had characterized their early interactions gave way to a more comfortable companionship. They worked side by side in the shop, took their meals together with Patrick, and in the evenings, often sat on the porch watching the sunset while Florence mended clothes and Beau whittled small wooden figures that delighted the children who visited the shop. The new window glass arrived from Tucson, and Beau installed it with Florence's help, the two of them working together with a synchronicity that felt as natural as breathing. When the final pane was secured and the morning sunlight streamed through, illuminating the shop's interior with a golden glow, Florence's face lit up with such joy that Beau found himself reaching for her hand without thinking. "It's beautiful," she said, squeezing his fingers. "Even better than before." The wooden frame he had carved caught the light in a way that cast intricate shadow patterns on the shop floor. Florence bent down to trace them with her fingertips, her expression wondering. "How did you know to angle the wood just so?" Beau shrugged, pleased by her delight. "My father used to say that carpentry wasn't just about making things sturdy, but about how they lived with the light." Florence straightened, studying his face. "You never talk much about your family." "Not much to tell that's happy," he admitted. "My father died at Gettysburg. My mother followed him to the grave 2 years later. Consumption, the doctor said, but I think it was grief that really took her. My older brother was killed at Cold Harbor. After the war, there wasn't anything to keep me in Tennessee." Florence's eyes softened with understanding. "So you've been alone all this time?" "I've gotten used to it," Beau said, though even to his own ears, the words lacked conviction. "No one gets used to being alone," Florence replied softly. "We just learn to carry the emptiness." She hesitated, then added, "After my mother died, I thought I'd never feel whole again. I threw myself into the shop, into caring for Pa, but the hollow place was still there." "And now?" Beau asked, his voice low. Florence met his gaze steadily. "Now it feels a little less empty." The moment hung between them, charged with possibility, until the shop bell jingled as their first customer of the day entered, breaking the spell. Life settled into a new pattern. By day, Beau helped in the shop, assisting customers, building new shelves and display cases, and running errands to the various businesses in Florence. In the evenings, he often accompanied Florence on walks through town or sat with Patrick, playing checkers and listening to the older man's stories of Ireland and his early days in America. "How did you end up in Florence?" Beau asked one evening as they sat on the porch, the checkerboard between them. Florence was inside, finishing an alteration for Mrs. Henderson's new dress. Patrick moved a checker thoughtfully. "Came west after the war, like many. Was working as a carpenter in Tucson when I met Florence's mother, Margaret. She was a seamstress, making dresses for the fine ladies of Tucson." His eyes grew distant with memory. "Most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, with hair like sunshine and eyes that could see right through you." "Florence takes after her," Beau observed, moving his own checker. Patrick chuckled. "That she does. In looks and temperament both. Stubborn as the day is long, my Margaret was." His expression sobered. "We came to Florence in '72 when the town was still finding its feet. Opened the dress shop together. Had 15 good years before the fever took her." He sighed deeply. "Would have followed her to the grave myself if not for Florence. Couldn't leave my girl alone in the world." Beau nodded, understanding all too well the devastating power of grief. "She's remarkable, your daughter, strong in ways most men never have to be." "That she is," Patrick agreed. "Too strong sometimes, doesn't let herself need anyone." He fixed Beau with a penetrating look. "But she's starting to need you, I think, whether she admits it or not." Beau didn't know how to respond to that. The idea that Florence might need him, might want him in her life beyond their temporary arrangement, filled him with both hope and fear. Hope, because he had come to care for her deeply. Fear, because caring meant vulnerability, the possibility of loss. "Your move, boy," Patrick prompted, gesturing to the checkerboard. As June turned to July and the Arizona heat intensified, Beau began to think seriously about what would happen when his 2 months with the O'Briens came to an end. The idea of returning to his drifter's life, of moving on to California as he'd originally planned, no longer held any appeal. But what was the alternative? To propose marriage to Florence based on less than 2 months' acquaintance. To ask her to bind her life to a man with no roots, no property, and little to offer beyond his hands and his heart. These thoughts preoccupied him as he worked one afternoon, repairing a broken hinge on the shop's back door. He was so absorbed in his contemplation that he didn't notice Florence approaching until she spoke. "Penny for your thoughts. You've been staring at that hinge for 5 minutes without moving." Beau looked up, startled. "Just thinking about the future." "Oh." Florence sat on a nearby crate, smoothing her skirts. "What about it?" Beau hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "My 2 months here will be up in 2 weeks. "I know," she said quietly. "You've more than repaid your debt. The window is fixed, the shop is in better order than it's been in years, and Pa's back is finally improving with all the rest he's been able to get while you handle the heavy work. So I've fulfilled our arrangement," Beau said, testing the waters. Florence looked down at her hands. "Yes, you have. And after that," he pressed gently. "That depends," she said, finally meeting his eyes, "on what you want." The vulnerability in her expression made Beau's heart ache. He set down his tools and moved to sit beside her on the crate. "What I want," he said carefully, is to stay. Here in Florence, with you and your father. Florence's breath caught audibly. As what, an employee? As whatever you'll have me be, Beau replied honestly. A friend, a partner, a husband if you'd consider it. The word hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Florence's eyes widened, and for a terrible moment, Beau thought he'd misread everything, had presumed too much based on the growing closeness between them. Then Florence's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his own. I would consider it, she said softly, very seriously. Joy surged through Beau, so powerful it momentarily robbed him of speech. When he found his voice again, he asked, "Does that mean?" "It means," Florence replied with a small smile, "that I've grown fond of having you around, Beau Michaels. More than fond. And I'm not eager to see you ride away when your debt is paid." It wasn't a yes, not exactly, but it was enough for now, an acknowledgement that what had begun as an arrangement imposed by circumstance had evolved into something genuine and precious. Beau lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then I'll stay, for as long as you want me to." The moment was shattered by the sound of breaking glass from inside the shop, followed by Patrick's angry shout. Florence was on her feet instantly, rushing toward the back door with Beau close behind her. They burst into the shop to find Patrick leaning heavily on his cane, facing off against Harlan Weber and one of his ranch hands. A display of hatpins lay scattered across the floor amidst broken glass. "Get out of my shop," Patrick was saying, his face flushed with anger. "We're closed." Weber, clearly drunk despite the early hour, sneered. "Public establishment, can't refuse service." "We can when you're drunk and destructive," Florence interjected, moving to stand beside her father. "Leave now, Mr. Weber, before we summon Sheriff O'Malley." Weber's bloodshot eyes fixed on Florence with an unnerving intensity. There she is, the high and mighty Miss O'Brien. He took an unsteady step toward her. Too good for a man with property and wealth, but happy to take up with a drifter who cheats at cards. Beau moved forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Florence. "You need to leave, Weber." Weber's face contorted with rage. "Don't tell me what to do in my own town, boy." He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a revolver, waving it unsteadily between Patrick and Beau. "Think you can come here, steal what's mine, make me look like a fool?" Florence gasped, and Patrick attempted to push her behind him despite his infirmity. Beau held his ground, keeping his voice calm despite the fear gripping his chest. "Put the gun down, Weber. Nobody's stolen anything from you." "Liar," Weber spat. "She was supposed to be mine. Everyone knows it. Been courting her for a year before you showed up." "Harlan, that's not true and you know it," Florence said firmly, though Beau could hear the tremor in her voice. "I never encouraged your attentions. In fact, I explicitly rejected them, multiple times." Weber's hand tightened on the gun. "Doesn't matter. A woman doesn't always know what's good for her." His gaze shifted to Beau, hatred burning in his eyes. "But you won't be a problem much longer." Everything happened very quickly after that. Weber raised the gun, aiming directly at Beau's chest. Patrick shouted and lunged forward despite his bad back. Florence screamed. Beau dove to the side, colliding with a dress form that crashed to the floor with him. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the confined space of the shop. Beau felt a searing pain across his upper arm, but was more concerned with the sickening thud of a body hitting the floor behind him. "Pa!" Florence's anguished cry told Beau everything he needed to know. Ignoring his own injury, he scrambled to his feet to see Patrick O'Brien sprawled on the floor, blood spreading across his shirt from a wound in his shoulder. Weber stood frozen, the gun still in his hand, a look of shock replacing his drunken rage. His ranch hand was already backing toward the door, clearly wanting no part in what had just happened. "You shot him," Florence said in disbelief, kneeling beside her father. "You shot my father." Beau didn't hesitate. He launched himself at Weber, knocking the gun from his hand and taking the larger man to the floor. They struggled briefly, but Beau's fury gave him strength that Weber's alcohol-addled reflexes couldn't match. Within moments, Beau had him pinned, one knee in the center of Weber's chest. "Somebody get the sheriff," Beau shouted toward the street, where curious onlookers were beginning to gather at the sound of the gunshot. "And the doctor." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Reynolds arrived first, immediately attending to Patrick, who was conscious but in considerable pain. The bullet had struck his shoulder but missed any vital organs. "He's a lucky man," the doctor declared after his examination. "A few inches lower and we'd be having a very different conversation." Sheriff O'Malley took Weber into custody, his expression grim as he listened to accounts from Beau, Florence, and several witnesses who had seen Weber enter the shop in an obviously intoxicated state. "Attempted murder," the sheriff said, shaking his head as his deputy led a now sobered and subdued Weber away. "Harlan's daddy's money won't get him out of this one." Beau barely registered his own injury, a bullet graze along his upper arm that Dr. Reynolds cleaned and bandaged almost as an afterthought, until Florence insisted he sit down and let her examine it herself. "I'm fine," he protested, as she carefully unwrapped the doctor's bandage to check the wound. "It's just a scratch." "A scratch from a bullet," she corrected, her hands gentle but her voice unsteady. "You could have been killed, Beau. You and Pa both." The reality of how close they had come to tragedy hung heavily in the air. Patrick had been moved to his bed to rest. The shop had been closed for the day, and now Beau and Florence sat in the kitchen, the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the window as Florence redressed his wound. "I thought I was going to lose you both," she said quietly, securing the fresh bandage with steady hands that belied the emotion in her voice. "When that gun went off." "But you didn't," Beau reminded her, capturing her hands in his once she had finished. "We're both still here." Florence met his gaze, her blue eyes swimming with unshed tears. "When I saw you fall, when I saw Pa bleeding, I realized something." She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. "I realized that I love you, Beau Michaels. I love you, and the thought of losing you terrifies me." Beau's heart soared at her words. He reached up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently wiping away a tear that had escaped. "I love you too, Florence O'Brien. Have since that first day in the sheriff's office, I think, though I was too stubborn to admit it even to myself." Florence gave a watery laugh. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? Both too stubborn for our own good." "Maybe," Beau agreed with a smile, "but stubborn enough to build something that lasts if we do it together." He leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away from her lips, giving her the chance to pull away if she wished. Instead, Florence closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. When they finally broke apart, Beau rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Florence." Not because the sheriff suggested it, not because of an arrangement, but because we love each other and belong together. "Yes," Florence whispered without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you, Beau Michaels." A throat cleared from the doorway, and they looked up to see Patrick leaning against the frame, pale but smiling despite the bandage visible beneath his nightshirt. "About time," he said with satisfaction. "Now maybe I can get some grandchildren before I'm too old to bounce them on my knee." "Pa!" Florence exclaimed, her cheeks flushing. "You should be in bed." "Couldn't sleep with all this romance happening in my kitchen," Patrick retorted, making his way carefully to the table to join them. "Besides, we have a wedding to plan." The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity, as news of the engagement spread throughout Florence. Harlan Weber remained in jail awaiting trial, his father's influence insufficient to secure his release given the seriousness of the charges and the number of witnesses. Patrick's wound healed steadily, though he continued to milk his injury for sympathy and attention from the ladies of the town, who brought an endless procession of pies, stews, and casseroles to the O'Brien household. "At this rate, I'll never need to cook again," Florence remarked one evening as she, Beau, and Patrick sat on the porch enjoying a spectacular Arizona sunset and another pie courtesy of Mrs. Henderson. "One of the benefits of nearly getting shot," Patrick said cheerfully, helping himself to a second slice. "That, and seeing my daughter finally engaged to a man worthy of her." Beau laughed, his arm around Florence's shoulders. "I'm not sure I qualify as worthy, but I'll spend my life trying to be." The wedding was a simple affair, held in the small church on Florence's Main Street on a Saturday in late July. Florence wore a gown of ivory silk that she had sewn herself, with help from several of her customers who had insisted on contributing to the bride's attire as a wedding gift. Beau, in a new suit purchased with his own savings, waited at the altar with Patrick, who stood as his best man despite protests that the father of the bride should not also serve in the groom's party. "My daughter, my rules," Patrick had declared, and that was that. Sheriff O'Malley gave the bride away, his usually gruff demeanor softening as he placed Florence's hand in Beau's. "Knew you'd choose forever that first day in my office," he whispered to Beau with a wink before stepping back. The celebration afterward was held at the same Henderson barn that had hosted the Founders' Day dance, though with a much happier atmosphere than the night Weber had interrupted the festivities. The entire town turned out to wish the newlyweds well, bringing gifts, food, and high spirits. As night fell and lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the dancing couples, Beau led Florence outside for a moment of quiet beneath the stars. "Happy, Mrs. Michaels?" he asked, still marveling at the reality that this remarkable woman was now his wife. Florence's smile was radiant in the moonlight. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she admitted, stretching up to kiss him softly. "Though I still can't quite believe how we came to be here." "Fate has a strange sense of humor," Beau agreed, drawing her close against the desert night's chill. "If I hadn't gotten into that fight with Weber, if the sheriff hadn't given me that choice. If I hadn't been so stubborn about my window," Florence added with a laugh. "Then I might have passed right through Florence, Arizona, without ever knowing what I was missing," Beau said softly. "Instead, I found a home. I found you." As they stood together under the vast canvas of stars, Beau Michaels, who had once valued nothing more than his freedom to roam, found himself profoundly grateful for the jail cell he'd never had to occupy, for the choice that had led him not to imprisonment, but to liberation of a different kind, the freedom to love and be loved, to build a life with the woman in his arms. When the sheriff had given him a choice between jail or marriage, Beau had looked at Florence and chosen forever. It was, he knew with absolute certainty, the best decision he'd ever made. 5 years later, the bell above the door of Michael's fine apparel and woodworking jingled merrily as Beau pushed it open, his arms laden with parcels from the Tucson train station. "Papa, Papa." A small whirlwind with dark blonde curls and blue eyes identical to her mother's barreled into his legs almost before he could set down his burden. 4-year-old Margaret Michaels, named for Florence's mother, bounced with excitement. "Did you bring me something from Tucson? Did you see the train?" "Was it big?" Beau laughed, swinging his daughter up into his arms. "Yes to all 3 questions, Maggie girl. And where's your brother? Still napping?" "Patrick is awake and causing mischief as usual," Florence answered, emerging from the back of the shop with their 2-year-old son on her hip. "The boy, A miniature version of Beau with the same dark hair and smile reached for his father immediately. "Pa," he demanded, leaning precariously from Florence's arms. Beau set Maggie down to take his son, pressing a kiss to the top of his head before leaning in to kiss Florence as well. "Missed you all," he said, "even if I was only gone 2 days." "We missed you too," Florence replied, her free hand coming to rest on her slightly rounded belly where their third child was just beginning to show. "Though your father kept us entertained with stories about Ireland that I'm fairly certain are mostly fabrication. All true, every word." Patrick O'Brien's voice called from the workshop at the back of the store, where he now spent his days crafting small wooden toys that complemented the clothing and accessories sold in the front. His back had never fully recovered from his old injury and the gunshot wound, but he had found a new passion in creating playthings for his grandchildren and the other children of Florence. The shop itself had evolved over the past 5 years, expanding to include Beau's woodworking alongside Florence's dressmaking. The window that had once been at the center of their unlikely beginning now displayed both delicate gowns and intricately carved furniture, a testament to their complementary skills. Harlan Weber was long gone from Florence, having served 2 years in the territorial prison before being released on the condition that he leave Arizona Territory and never return. Last they'd heard, he had gone to California and lost most of his inheritance in bad mining investments. "How was your business in Tucson?" Florence asked as they moved to the back of the shop where a small sitting area had been arranged for family and favored customers. "Productive," Beau replied, settling into a chair with Patrick Jr. on his lap while Maggie climbed onto her grandfather's knee. "The furniture commission for the new hotel is confirmed, and I've ordered all the lumber we'll need. And," he added with a grin, "I may have secured us an order for 20 identical dresses for the Harvey girls at the new railroad restaurant." Florence's eyes widened. 20 identical dresses. "Beau, that's wonderful. With the new sewing machine, I can manage that order in half the time it would have taken before." "I thought you'd be pleased," Beau said, his chest swelling with pride at his wife's accomplishments. What had begun as a modest dress shop was now one of the most successful businesses in Florence, with orders coming in from as far away as Phoenix and Tucson. Later that evening, after the children had been put to bed and Patrick had retired to his room at the back of the house, having refused to move to his own place despite Beau and Florence's offer to build him one, the couple sat on the porch swing Beau had crafted for their first anniversary. "Can you believe it's been 5 years since that day in the sheriff's office?" Florence asked, leaning against Beau's shoulder as they gently swung back and forth. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Beau admitted, his arm around her waist. "Other times, I can hardly remember what life was like before you and the children." "Lonely, I imagine," Florence said softly. "For both of us." Beau nodded, remembering the drifter he had been, always moving, never allowing himself to form attachments. "I never thought I'd thank a man for pulling a gun on me in a saloon, but if Weber hadn't started that fight, we might never have met," Florence finished for him. "Or at least, not in the way we did." "I like to think we'd have found each other somehow," Beau said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Some things are just meant to be," Florence smiled, placing her hand over his where it rested on her growing belly. "Like our family." As the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky above Florence, Arizona, Beau Michaels reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had led him to this moment. A bar fight, a broken window, a sheriff with a mischievous streak, and a beautiful, stubborn woman who had captured his heart despite her initial reluctance. When given the choice between jail or marriage, He had looked at Florence O'Brien and chosen forever. And every day since, that choice had been reaffirmed as the wisest decision of his life. "I love you, Florence Michaels," he whispered against her hair. "And I love you, Beau Michaels," she replied, turning her face up to his for a kiss as sweet and promising as their first. "Forever."